Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Cultivate, which is a podcast of the Evergreen Association. Today, I'm excited to bring on board Reverend Dr. Liliana DaValle, who has graciously blessed us with her time. I'm excited to dive into her life story. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. So, Liliana, thank you so much for joining us today. I thought for some of those who are new to Evergreen, I think most in the Evergreen family know you because of just what you've done um, throughout your career. But for those who don't, maybe it'd be nice to just give a brief introduction of who you are and where you're serving in ministry today.
Okay, I'll be brief. I was born in Argentina. I lived in this country with my husband for 42 years. Following our call to ministry in 82, we went to seminary together, graduated together, got ordained together, served together as co-pastors until 1997. And then that was in Los Angeles, California. Then we moved to Boston, Massachusetts, where I became an area minister and was there for 10 years, then 4 years as executive minister in Rhode Island. After that, I came back to California and served there as interim minister and settled pastor at a church in San Jose. Retired in January of 2020, right before COVID. And then after that, last year in May, I started an interim ministry at Urban Grace in Tacoma. That's where I am right now.
Well, I mean, you went through that very quickly, but I mean, each thing that you mentioned is like a lifetime in itself, I feel. There's so much that has happened. Your work as a scholar, as a pastor, working at a denominational level, your passion for activism. It's hard to sum up, isn't it? So I thought it'd be interesting to maybe start a conversation today. And we had a great conversation about this earlier. It's like, what do you see as the overarching theme that could maybe be like that golden thread that weaves through all these diverse experiences? What do you feel like is the thing that you see connecting it all?
All throughout that experience, which included, like you said, I've been very brief, included my academic journey as well, both doing my doctorates. I have two. And I have a doctorate in the ministry, and I have completed a doctorate in business administration, both professional degrees. And I had taught at seminaries, Andover Newton in the East Coast, and Berkeley School of Theology. All throughout, the common thread has been doing ministry with people who suffer. I started out in the mid 80s and all through seminary working at domestic violence agencies as a counselor for battered women. I also work a little bit on a suicide line, phone line, emergency suicide line. That was in the 80s. Then in the 90s, I worked as a hospice chaplain for 5 years in Los Angeles with people who were dying. I worked at the same time because in the 90s is where my husband and I were co-pastors in Southgate, California.
Okay.
I did at the church a lot of gang work with kids in gangs, the younger ones, the teens who were in those gangs, tagging gangs in Los Angeles. We had a basketball court and we opened it. I worked with the youth in the church, and we opened the gym for them to come and practice basketball. We organized a championship with street kids, with other churches. It was a very intense ministry. It was wonderful. I have the badge of honor of having done that for 7 years and none of the girls got pregnant during that time, which is it's pretty amazing uh, with that kind of population. It was very intense. The kids were picked up on the street often, and they called me from juvenile hall and said, Pastor, I'm in again. I need your prayers. You know, it was that kind of relationship. I didn't know how to deal with that population. I had never been in the inside of a jail cell. I never had the experience of being in a gang or doing drugs or anything like that. But when I prayed to God and I said, what do I do with them? Very distinctly, I understood I had to be a mother to them. And that's what I knew how to do. I have 4 children. They were part of my ministry. They helped me out. They supported this ministry and were present with the gang kids in every event we had. So it was risky. It was interesting, but above everything else, it was life saving for many of them.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible in itself. But I'm curious, like, because of all of these amazing things, like what you just described, like that is maybe the goal of some people's like sole vocation, but you've done that in addition to many things. You just talked about not just 1, but 2 doctorates. So when we're talking about that overarching theme, did you come to realize this theme like in retrospect, or was it a conscious choice from the very beginning that like walking with the suffering was important to you? What was your like realization about your common theme? Like how did it come about?
I knew from the very beginning I had an inclination to do this kind of thing. Even before going to seminary, I went to volunteer at a community social service agency for Latinos in Richmond, California. And as a volunteer, I helped people. I went with them to Social Security Administration to translate for them and things like that. I gave rides to people. So I had that inclination to work with people in need. But then through seminary, I became more conscious of that choice. But in reality, in retrospect, Sam, I think those ministries found me. However, when I wanted to volunteer, I chose that kind of thing. After the Los Angeles experience, a long time after that, during my time in Boston, I work also as a co-facilitator for a bereavement group because based on my experience in hospice, I could do that. But when I was back in California, at one point, I was at a church where I got a little bored. So I went to volunteer with the chaplaincy at a city jail in San Jose, California. I volunteered there for 2.5 years. I went weekly to the men's jail to have a class on spiritual development with them. So I did that for 2.5 years. Also, pretty much at the same time, I was in another church in Walnut Creek. Yes, I was at both churches at the same time, pastor in both churches. Both were not very active during the week. Not many people, much traffic in the church office during the week. So in the other one, in Walnut Creek, I went across the street to the hospital and volunteered as a chaplain at the hospital. Even when I chose things to do, like volunteering, I chose that kind of thing. Then I ended up in Grace Baptist Church in San Jose, which is an evergreen church. And there I found that it was already there, a huge ministry with the houseless. And I got involved, hands and feet into that ministry for 5 years. So some things chose me, I chose other things, but it has always been on the line of supporting the people who suffer because of different reasons.
Right. And that's an interesting way of putting it because, I do some like vocational coaching with some like soon to be graduating seminarians. And there sometimes is this tension of like, okay, well, what do I do with my life? What has God called me to? And then there's almost this pressure of like, well, I gotta figure out, I gotta find it. And then there's other people who are on the reverse where they're like, oh, doesn't matter what I do, God's going to make me do something. And I like how you sort of describe it. It's a bit of both, isn't it? It's that you weren't just passively sitting around. Like when you actually had the time that you mentioned during the week, you actually looked for opportunities, but the opportunities you found were very unique and felt like a gift to you, right? So it felt like almost what I'd call like a dance of, it's not just my will or God's will, but it's kind of both, like God and our will dancing together, and we find that match. And it's very beautiful, just very evident in your life. Because I liked how you talked about how your work with the gangs, that's not something that you thought of or imagined, but it seems like it was such a wonderful fit for you. And God's used you in so many wonderful ways that it fits you even better than you could have thought of. Like you wouldn't have chosen that, but God knew that this was a good choice for you. So it's a great kind of example of those matching of the wills. That kind of makes me think a bit about when you think of like young people who may want to consider a vocation of ministry, going back to the beginning, what would you maybe want to say to them when they're kind of thinking like, should I go into ministry? What should I do? How should I do this?
A few years back, I was at the commencement of the Berkeley School of Theology, and the preacher was Reverend Jackson. She was the executive director of the Minister Council, the National Minister Council at the time. And her speech was fabulous, and I will quote her because I think it's the best statement I've ever heard about what to do when you're new in ministry. When you have a call to ministry or when you just graduate from seminary, she said, the ministry you're looking for is not out there. What you want, your ideal of ministry doesn't exist. So go into the world and make it happen. You create it. And you can create or recreate ministry. You can think beyond the church scope. Think about ministries that may go out of the walls of a church into a community. Think about transformation. Think about creation of opportunities. And I still think that's very valid because it's true. Especially if we talk about people of color. As a person of color, I want to say people who are new in ministry, people of color who are new in ministry, just called or just graduated, whether they speak a different language or they speak English, it doesn't matter too much. The important thing is to remember who you are, because you will never stop being who you are. Right. The world would always perceive you as the person you were born. So be who you are, remember who you are, celebrate who you are, but learn to navigate the waters of the dominant culture. Because if you don't do that, you will be marginal and you will not have a voice. When you learn to navigate those waters, keeping your identity, it will become really interesting. It's like a roller coaster. It's exciting, exhilarating, a little bit scared at times, but in the end, you can close your eyes and know you're in the hands of God and you're going to arrive safely to where God wants you to be.
There's so much good stuff that you're just talking about right now. I love it. Just what I really resonated when you're talking about, what I'm observing in American Christianity is that there's such a majority culture there, so there's almost this pressure is that you must conform to that majority culture to be legitimate, right? But, we were talking about this in our last episode too, is that if you follow that, just like you're saying, you can't be true to yourself because you keep thinking about what you're not. And I need to create ministry into something that I'm not doing right now. But if you could, I love what you're saying because you're talking about no, actually start with who you are, and what you create will be actually unique. And we need that. In fact, it's not something a problem, but it's actually your gift that you're not like everyone. And then it's a great inspiration for people who are in the minority, is saying that we need more of you. to change this majority culture. So I love that. And, I feel like something that I'm hearing throughout your work is that you're very comfortable being the prophetic voice, not being afraid to get in there, challenge the narratives that be. What would you want to say to ministers who are just getting very discouraged right now? Like just feeling like our voice is being overlooked, just thinking about the media right now, and people are very just frustrated with like how people are portraying the church. How would you maybe want to speak to some pastors who are very discouraged about being prophetic in these, divisive times?
There's a difference between being prophetic and being angry. And we go through anger often, but we need to work that out within ourselves. Maybe we need therapy. Maybe we need spiritual director. Maybe we need all of those things, friends. We need to vent. We need to debrief. We need to process that anger. But we cannot use anger as a tool for ministry because that alienates people. Being prophetic is different than being angry. Being prophetic is being able to call things out without hurting people. There's no need to hurt anybody. We have been called to build up and not to destroy. So that's the nature of ministry. I think we need a lot of courage. We need a lot of courage to be able to do that. In my recent ministries, and I have ministered among Euro-American people for the longest time. I mean, in 1990, coming out of seminary, we were called to a Euro-American congregation that had a little tiny group of Latinos, and they called us because we were bilingual and bicultural. So since then, I've always been in touch with Euro-American congregants or people in the regions I work at in the East Coast. But most recently, because I acquired the language and the skills and the understanding of these issues, I've been talking to my congregations, white congregations, about white supremacy and about white privilege, and explaining things to them without offending. Because if I offend them, I lose them. If I offend them, I lose my voice because they will not listen to me anymore. I position myself next to them on their side, and I help them see what's going on. Right now, I have a specific case where there is, without giving too much information, a situation at the church where a person of color has been offensive to some people. And all the people who came to me to complain are Euro-Americans. So after finding out the details and the background of things and everything, I decided not to talk to this person. The group of people complaining asked me to talk to this person. And I decided, instead of talking to this person, gather the group of complainers and talk to them about white privilege and white expectations. And it's a reverse of things, Typically, you take the identified patient and work with that person, but I decided to do the opposite. The issue is not finished yet, so I cannot give you the end result yet. But I pray and hope that it will work.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, my mind is just thinking about all these things. I just love what you said about the prophetic is not angry, but it's interesting in this current age. I feel like we've almost given anger, it's become a virtue. People say like, oh, wow, look at this person. They're so angry for this or that, even if it's a good cause. But I love how you described anger is that it's limited. Maybe it can spark or provoke, but it's not a fruit of the Spirit. It's not something that God ultimately will use. And so it's not the long-term, strategy for ministry, as you're talking about. And I wonder, as you kept talking and you're talking about white privilege, white supremacy, and like the difficulty in addressing that, I wonder if we also have anger, if we take it even further, is like it's really just this strong expression of self-righteousness. And maybe that's what's really holding us all up. is that we come to the table and we try and like use all these like spiritual words. This is a holy anger or righteous anger or whatever. But if you peel it back enough, it's just really this very passionate self-righteousness, is that I am totally right. And therefore you are wrong and probably stupid, right? And we wonder why we can't have good conversation or we can't be transformed, because we come in with that difficult mindset. I know we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but because you have so much familiarity on this subject, I'm curious just to talk about how would you address like conflict like that where it just feels like people are both like confident in the right. Like that case study that you just shared with us, it just sounds like a perfect case, but you don't have to reference that because I don't want to get you in trouble. But you have lots of experience in a lot of places. So like, how do you address when like two groups of people just feel so confident, like I am right, you are wrong, you are my enemy? Like where do we go from here? And I know you do a lot of work with diversity and reconciliation. So I'd be really interested in your insight about this. Like, how do we move forward when we're all deadlocked?
I can think of many examples in my life, in my ministry, of that. Not always. First of all, we need not to be naive. Not always will have a happy ending. Not always will, go into the sunset holding hands or singing Kumbaya. Sometimes our intervention in a situation like that is just one more step in the participants' journey. First of all, we need to understand that this is not our work, this is God's work. So what we do, inspired by the Holy Spirit, we do in the trust that is part of God's work in the lives of those people involved in the conflict, or that church that has problems. Some, even in your ministry, where there is, there may be conflict or not, but the core of your ministry is to help churches to be revitalized. That's the work of God. What you do with those churches is walk with them in part of their journey. Some of those churches are 100 years old, and will be 100 more. So you are just for part of the journey. When we are pastors, we're there for part of the journey. So we cannot see the end necessarily, but we can contribute our best to them learning one more nugget about the situation. So the clearer we are, the straighter we are, the directer as we are, we will help the situation. And if they get angry at us, which happens because people tend to shoot the messenger, right? So be it. It's not the end of the world. We need to be very clear on boundaries. My life is invested in ministry, but ministry is a part of my life. So I can deal with the frustrations and I can deal with the bad results sometimes, understanding that they're not ruining my life. My life is much more than that. That helps to do some self-care, to protect ourselves in this work, because we will be attacked, we will be demonized eventually. But eventually we will also see the good parts of things. People, the Holy Spirit operating repentance in people. Recently, I went to the women's retreat, the Northwest and Evergreen Women's Retreat. And they showed a movie. I don't know if you heard about this movie. The movie is called All Saints. All Saints is the name of an Episcopalian church, and it's the story of that church, basically. It's a Christian movie. And I don't watch too many Christian movies because they tend to be cheesy. But this one is really good.
Okay.
And there are many, many things to that movie that I like. But one of them is the transformation with one of the characters. You can see the transformation. He is an old grouch who complains about everything and doesn't like anything and doesn't like anybody, and very negative person in the movie. And through the movie, you can see the transformation, you can see the change, you can see it, you can see it, you can see it. And in the end, he's a big supporter and, embracer. And so sometimes God gives you the privilege of seeing that. Sometimes in ministry, you have to do the work trusting that the results are in the hands of God.
I love that because, this ties to what you said earlier about how, even your vocation, it wasn't just you striving to make it all work. Like, you recognize the divine was at work gifting you as well. But it wasn't completely that. It was like this wonderful dance, the partnership. And then again, here we are later on in our conversation. And I love how you described it. This is actually self-care, to realize that you're not alone doing this hard work. And I think you've answered very profoundly the earlier question about how do you speak to people who are very discouraged in ministry, is that you're not alone. You don't know. You're just called to a certain specific time. You can only do what you can do, and there's a lot before you, a lot after you. I feel like every pastor in the Evergreen Association could really hear this, is that some of us just strive way too much on our own, and we don't recognize that the Spirit was called to walk with us. And I love that. I really appreciate you saying that, even just to me, just hearing those words again. I think we just need to speak that to each other, right? It's not all on you. The gifts will come, right? As you put in the work, God will meet you there. That's wonderful. So maybe, because, we've been talking about some maybe darker, difficult things about ministry, maybe we could kind of end our conversation on a more positive note. Reverend Liliana, you've seen so much of the church in so many directions, perspectives. What do you think what are your dreams and hopes for the church in this special age that we're living in? I feel like it's such a transitional age. The numbers, the future of the church, a lot of things are not for sure. We had a lot of confidence of what Christianity would look like a couple decades ago, but we're entering into this new age where we're not sure what's next. What do you feel are your dreams and hopes for the church in these uncertain times?
Well, first of all, I still believe in the church. I still believe the church will survive these times and will keep going, because some people think that with a decline in membership in most churches around the country, we are seeing the end times of the churches as we know it. The ministry will take a different format, if you will. And I think the answer is yes, and both and is yes. There are new ministries, there are new formats for doing church. There are churches that meet at a cafe. But I also believe that the churches we know will continue. And I'm encouraged to believe that because I see some examples of churches that are growing. Some I'm astonished at seeing the church where I'm ministering right now. And I can speak freely about this because it's not my doing. I mean, I've been here for 14 months. It's not like I did anything special for the church. It's like the church is very special. In 14 months, we received 22 new members. The church is growing. The church is growing. So my dream for the church is to see a church for everybody, a church where all kinds of people can come, all kinds of people, people of different colors, and people from different sexual orientations, and people from different walks of life, different socioeconomic status, a church that serves their community and is fully engaged with the community, a church that welcomes everybody but keeps the prophetic voice. Because this is a problem. When we come to the point of saying we want to welcome everybody, then we hit the wall of what about those who are against this kind of inclusion? Do we welcome them too? It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma. Yeah. So my answer to that is do not lose track of the prophetic voice, the prophetic vision. Yeah. I believe, and I have told this church, we include everybody but those who want to exclude. So we need to set a limit. We need to draw the line at some point. We cannot be so naive as to believe that everyone means everyone. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. Because the naysayers, the racist, the homophobic, I can keep going on and on and on. You get the picture. We can't, in reality, have communion with them. We don't have anything in common with them. Even the Christ we preach is different than the Christ they preach.
Right.
So there are two Christian churches. The church is as divided as the country is, I suppose. And we need to make some important decisions in our life.
Yes.
And I'd rather make a decision for
go
the
ahead.
people who suffer. I'd rather make a decision for the people who are in need, the people who need healing.
I love how you frame that, because I feel like people have not done that deeper reflection that you have, and like, oh, we just stand for everything. It's like, if you stand for everything, then you stand for nothing, right? And I love how you're talking about inclusion doesn't mean that you just release your prophetic conviction, right? We still have convictions. We still have a centering vision, a centering task. And, you explain that beautifully. And I feel like some churches are sort of naive in what they think like diversity looks like. It's very superficial. It's just like, oh, let's all get along. Let's just not get in each other's faces. And we end up with these churches that have no conviction, have no prophetic voice. And then we also have churches that go the other way, is that they just become these echo chambers. But that hard work of what you're describing, of like, well, could we be inclusive but still prophetic? That's really difficult, but that's the task, right? I mean, what you're talking about, because that's only when we're really doing the work of Jesus. And it's painful, it's hard, it's long. But I'm so grateful for people like you that are committed to doing it, and to doing it thoughtfully. I think some people look at Evergreen from afar, and they have a lot of judgments about who we are. They might think we're like, super idealistic, or they can't do that, like, good luck. But, we've been doing it for a while. And I feel like there's a prophetic voice here that Evergreen is doing that is not just for churches, but, as you're even alluding to, is that it's for the nation, that we could really learn from. Well, before I wrap up, and I just want everyone to know, Liliana's not asked me to do this, but Liliana, from the beginning of this podcast, I wanted you on an episode for sure. And I just apologize that it took so many episodes to work this all out. It was just scheduling with everybody. But I was so excited to have you on this episode, because I feel like all the churches could really learn from your diverse experiences and the wisdom that you've accumulated. And I had no doubt you're going to have some great things to say today. But it's very clear that there's so much more. And so I'm so grateful for you. And I just really want to exhort like my other peers in the region, both you and your partner Horacio, like, you've just done so much important work that I think a lot of Evergreen pastors, whatever your caucus is, we could really learn from you. And we really appreciate you walking with us in the Evergreen family. And I'm very grateful. There was so much I wanted to talk about, but it was painful just to kind of figure out like where I wanted to start. But I think this was a great start. I would certainly love to have further conversations with you about a number of things. But I'm so grateful for your time. So thank you very much. But yeah, and thank you all for joining us on this episode of Cultivate. Don't forget to subscribe and like on YouTube. You can find us on Linktree with all the links to our different media. And we are so grateful for you. Please stay in touch. And thank you again. All right, we'll see you next time.